Before we begin, Jamie has a very special guest to introduce.
Yeah, well, forget this. I'd like to welcome Kelsey Sinsevath, who's come down here, please. Kelsey? Yeah, right in the middle, would be great.
Wow. That's a beautiful film.
Thank you.
It's extraordinary. We have some real experts here to shed light on a number of aspects of the film. The number one expert being Kelsey, who can talk about it from her personal experience, who is now a senior. So we also have Dr. Pam Cantor, who's the founder and CEO of Turnaround for Children, which works with New York City public schools and public schools in other cities as well to bring this kind of culture of care and non-judgment and compassion and really trauma-informed understanding across the whole school culture, which is very difficult to do in a public school, as she can explain, in order to help young people in these schools deal with the stresses and succeed academically. And Dr. Howard Steele, who's one of the world's experts in attachment theory, and who runs the center, as you learned before here, the Center for Attachment Theory, who can speak to what we've just seen and really help us understand what's the nature of this seismic shift that we're seeing in the world, and really how is it grounded in hard science. And Jamie, of course, he's won many awards for both feature films and documentaries and covered a wide variety of subjects, and including the miracle of organ transplants, which he won an award for, and also set up a center called I'm going to talk about it, the James Redford Institute for Transplant Awareness, after having had a liver transplant himself. So I thought we could just begin, Kelsey. You know, it's now 3 years later since we saw the scenes in the film. How have the last 3 years been? What's changed in your life since the filming took place?
Well, I definitely dress better, for one. I'm actually going to the community college in Walla Walla, as well as fulfilling my high school needs. So I'm doing both. So that's going really good for me. Last year, I ended my junior year with a 4.0, so that's been awesome. I still attend Lincoln for 4 periods a day, and then I get in my car on lunch with about 10, 15 minutes to make it to the community college, get over there, and take 2 classes out there. And I also have a job now. I'm making blizzards at Dairy Queen. So pretty much that's been what's up with me, is just the community college and working. And I'm not too much of a socialite. I don't really have a lot of friends. I spend a lot of time with family now, and I think that's where my heart's at as of right now.
I guess one question I wanted to ask you is, are you able to see what part of sort of your evolution you could directly attribute to Lincoln, and what part of it is sort of from your inner journey and sort of qualities that you had even before you came to Lincoln, of being able to really look at your own feelings and describe them? Can you describe how the school itself helped you? Are you able to have enough distance to see that?
So I've always been very in tune with my emotions. Even as a young child, I still wrote poetry, what I didn't know was poetry. But going to Lincoln helped me express that in a healthy way. And it still remains that way for me and many other kids, is that I don't feel judged there, and that is the reason, it shines really bright. The reason I've stayed there all 4 years is because I think a lot of kids, some kids who transfer over from the regular high school kind of outgrow Lincoln, just because it is a smaller environment and you tend to see more diversity in the children. But one thing's always remained true for me, is that I feel like I can be myself there. And that's still the biggest part about Lincoln, is that there's such a level of acceptance, and it feels like such a family atmosphere, and you have people you can talk to all the time. And something that's not as prevalent in the film as it really is in real life is the health center, because it is such a huge contribute to Lincoln. Kids can schedule their doctor appointments, and women can get information about birth control, and it's just, that's the most beautiful thing about Lincoln, is that you have all your support, and you have the health center right outside. And I don't know if I answered your question all the way. I'm sorry. I start rambling and then I just keep going.
Dr. Steele, can you bring from this your research on attachment? What were we seeing there? What was really happening? From the point of view of how you would describe it, in terms of compensating for some of the early attachment that didn't happen in these kids' lives. Can you explain how the school was, or maybe that's leading the question, so I'll just ask you, what were we seeing?
Well, I'm so grateful that Kelsey is here to speak with us, and I'll pick up on that point about the integration of a health center, that it was a choice, a decision, an insight of the school to realize that loving the youngsters, the students, was vital and important, but in some sense, love is not enough. Relationships are complicated. The healthy and productive relationships that one of your teachers frequently made mention of, that was what needs to be worked on. In providing the health center in the school was a big part of that, because of course in typical development, health centers available, maybe not as widely as it should be in the most developed economic democracy in the world. It's a sad fact that healthcare is more advanced in the other democracies in the world. I'm Canadian, I'm also British, and I'm applying to become a naturalized American citizen now, but I still will never forswear the affiliation I have to a nationalized healthcare system where there wouldn't be the need to have a healthcare system in the school in those other countries, because that is available even to the poorest members of the community with adverse histories. What I think the school was providing from a attachment theory perspective was typical relationships where affection and support and limit setting are part of it on the part of the teachers, the adults, but also honest exchanges about difficulties that come up every day, many times a day. And what I'm referring to is what we now know to be part of healthy typical development, rupture repair cycles that are there in the best optimal parent-child relationship. It's not all about sensitivity and love. That's the background, hopefully. But there are, we know from scientific observations of parent-child interactions, half the time, in the best of circumstances, parents are not identifying accurately the cues from the infant. But what they're doing is noticing the gap, like the wonderful exchange of text messages that we saw, noticing that there's been a misunderstanding, but signaling to the other that I'm here to listen and try and figure out what's gone wrong. Let's rewind. Let's, for a moment, and take another approach at it. And I'm here to listen. The teachers demonstrated beautifully that stance.
I mean, the thing that I saw when I first saw this film, and this relates to your work, Pam, is there's so much care and so much nuance in managing these relationships. And then you have this thing called the New York City public schools with, so many people and so many teachers and unions and all of these things in this. And the question is it even conceivable to bring in, and I know this is a leading question for you because you're doing it, how do you bring into that system this big bureaucracy, this level of touch and feel, and how are you doing that? And can you describe your work and then explain that?
Sure. Turnaround's work which has been developing over the last 10 years, is focused on a whole school approach to building an environment for kids that is physically and emotionally safe, but is very much informed by the science that we know about adversity. And the science tells us a couple of really, really important things. One, it tells us that adversity doesn't just happen to them, to children, it happens inside them through the biologic mechanism of stress. So it goes right into them, and it affects two primary things. One is all around the kinds of things you saw in this film around learning readiness and impulse control and kids being easily triggered and reacting to things out of proportion. But something that Kelsey just mentioned is something we also know, and that is that adversity impacts the immune system. These kids have lots of health issues, not just the stomach issues that were pointed out, but lots of health issues. So this issue of a holistic place that does have the access to health, I couldn't overemphasize the importance of that. But the thing I think that ties it all together is that if you can imagine a school with 400, 500, 1,000 kids, how are we going to know which kids are experiencing acute stress or tolerable stress or toxic stress? It's almost impossible to know. And if they act out and they have externalizing, easily triggered kind of symptoms, they're likely to get individualized help. But what if they're quiet? What if the issues are more on the inside, but nonetheless affecting their readiness to learn and their readiness to develop and grow? So a lot of the understanding of this told us that services in schools are part of the solution, but they're not the whole solution. That the approach has to be whole school. And it has to be a school where the second you walk in the door, you know that you are physically and emotionally safe. You're not going to be re-triggered. That the relationships across the school will be filled with trust and love. And that the school is going to intentionally build exactly those attributes that are most impacted by adversity. If we're able to do this as a country, not just as a nonprofit organization, what we've done is we've taken a public health approach to what we have today, which is a public education crisis. And Turnaround as a nonprofit wants to be an example of that. But the thing that we really want is to take the practices and take the things we've come to understand and make that true for the 51% of kids that are growing up in poverty today.
Thank you. So Jamie and Kelsey, this is for both of you. You guys have spent the most time in Lincoln. You know, what is the secret sauce? What is it that is happening in the school that makes it possible for all the adults to respond so consistently and not get triggered themselves because their buttons get pushed a lot? And you know, and when did you begin to feel safe in that environment? What were the things that happened in your life, Kelsey, in the school that made you begin to sort of feel that this is a safe place for you?
Before I answer that, I want to add on and mention that it's very difficult to keep this relationship consistent with children, constantly, going out of your way to make sure that this kid is okay, maybe even spending money out of your own pocket. It's very difficult to sometimes see them travel down the wrong path or go through some hiccups. It's really difficult, and it's really easy to start taking it personal. Like, I've been doing so much for this kid. Well, you can either take that in a sad way or get angry. But the truth is that seeing the outcome when it does go right is so beautiful. And sometimes you have those hiccups because Lord knows I had so many of those hiccups. But the one thing that remained true is that they stayed by my side that entire time. And it's been a beautiful journey. And just not in just Lincoln. When my aunt, decided to take care of me, when she took me in because I was, out of control, and it was really tough on my mom. So, my aunt took me in knowing that it was going to be difficult, and yes, she is a family member, but that was still hard for her. Her kids were already grown up and out of the house. She had to re-raise a girl. She'd only had boys, and she knew that was going to be tough, but she held on, and I mean, I look at where I'm at now, and it's a very beautiful thing, and I just wanted to mention that before. But when I started feeling safe is when I realized that they were human too. And one thing I wanted to mention is that Gordon said something to Jamie that, like, why would he even want to put the stress on himself to get upset with a kid? He just wants to talk to them. I just want to talk to you. I just want to figure out what's wrong with you. Why would I take on that stress of, punishing you and being like, hey, just get out? Like, I just want to talk to you. Like, just tell me what's going on. And that's it takes a lot of stress off his own back. So it's not just for the child, but, talking to the kid and just saying, like, hey, what's up is so much easier than just being like, okay, get out. Like, you're on my nerves. But, yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And I know Jamie has a lot more to say on that as well.
Not as well as you. No, I think one thing you have to acknowledge, this idea of what stress does, what stress does, what we do about it, what the biology of stress is, what its effect is on children and teens. This is an emergent movement right now, and it's happening, for sure. But in the 3 years since I read the first Adverse Childhood Experiences study, the level of awareness I've seen cropping up is extraordinary. I mean, the graphs, in fact, there's a paper released recently about the frequency in which this issue is being explored in the media, and it's ramping up exponentially. But nonetheless, we're in the middle of an emergent movement, and I think, as with all emergent movements, you start with charismatic leaders, people that are uniquely excellent on a certain level. They set the example, they sort of blaze the path for everybody to follow. And I think it's a little bit like this right now because it hasn't become sort of a normative environment in how we deal with kids in school. So what you see at Lincoln High School, is it really fair to expect every teacher to take their students on a college tour? Is really every kid who's in need of the kind of love and care that Diana got from her new foster mother, Shelley? Is that really fair to put that on teachers? No, you can't really make those specific demands. But what you do see is the true value of love and compassion. I'm from Northern California, and I'm supposed to sort of watch out for Northern California words like love and compassion, So I apologize.
You're in New York. Be careful. Be careful.
I mean, in the end, you can't walk away from those words here. And, the extraordinary stats that come out of Lincoln, I mean, if other schools could just shadow and vaguely mimic the success at Lincoln, they would be making a huge leap forward. So you don't have to be a superhero to be trauma-informed. You just have to have a little bit of heart and stay cool, as Eric said, Eric Gordon. He really felt that it was easier for him to listen and let it go by than react. It was better for him.
So what are the implications so there's this expression in business, they say culture eats strategy for breakfast. Okay, so we have a lot of strategies for sort of solving educational problems, but what we're really talking about here is building a whole school culture. So how do we bring the research, I'm gonna ask both of you on the end here, how do we bring the research of what is required in a school culture into the school so that the whole school adopts that culture? It's such a hard thing to do. What have you seen in your work that we should be looking at?
Well, very clearly, going back decades, we know that the most successful schools have successful leadership that inspires the teachers and teachers who inspire the students. We saw that in the film. And I think one of the brilliant things about the film was not only the honesty, the incredible honesty of the students about their experiences, but the way the teachers themselves, the principal, open up about their histories and the complicated journeys that some of them have followed to arrive at the place of working at that high school. And I think that kind of honesty is essential to a successful school environment. There are many other kinds of approaches at work and demonstrated across the country. One of them is the whole range of after-school programs. And I'm most familiar with the I Have a Dream Foundation programs that's in 70 comes to mind again. 70. The film was viewed in 70 different places. There, I Have a Dream programs in 70 different cities across the country. Those are programs where they locate themselves in communities like Walla Walla, and they try and establish a relationship with the parents when the children are in kindergarten or first grade. And they say to the parents, are you willing to send your child to the after-school program run by the I Have a Dream Foundation staff? Each program has a benefactor who makes a commitment to the staff and to the families that if the children come in first grade, they can come in second and third and fourth grade, they can come through middle school. The doors open through the high school years, although then they're often in very different locations, and still they come back. And the promise is made that the dream will be helped along, and the dream is to get to college. And I've been to these after-school programs where second and third graders are asked, what's the dream? And they say, to go to college. And some of these programs have dramatically increased high school graduation rates, rather like the story we saw on film. So it's one thing, one perspective.
I think one picture that I'd want to give you, I mean, if you remember how the film began and remember the fights in the hallways and the feeling of lack of safety, think of that as a starting point in the culture of many, many public schools in high poverty communities across the country. So if you start there and you say, what would it take to restore a safe and protected teaching and learning environment, and then bring about teaching and learning, because ultimately the mission of schools is teaching and learning. So in our work, we work primarily through 3 levers, but the ultimate aim is to get to something that is felt throughout the school. So one lever would be offering individualized supports, not unlike the health center that Kelsey spoke about, for kids with tremendously intense needs, not only because of the fact that they have intense needs, but because their intense needs can manifest in behaviors that disrupt the entire school and can bring the school to its knees, because we've seen that. We also have to, and we've learned a lot about this, we have to give teachers tools, because if the teachers don't have the tools to create classrooms that feel good and engaging to kids, then they'll just use the social worker or the mental health service as the default disciplinary pipeline just to get the kids out of their class. And then the leader is the pathway to something that is whole school. If the leader is with you, the teachers will be with you. But I want to mention one specific thing, and we've seen it across all of our schools, and that is that if a teacher sees relatively quickly how something you teach them is actually going to make their job much, much easier, their job that is causing them stress, their job that is making them feel like a failure, and their job to see kids successfully engaged in learning, they grab it. They want that. So the incentive for leaders and teachers is that there are practices that actually help kids to be ready for learning and help the environment become an environment that supports the very thing that they went into this profession to do, which is to be terrific teachers. So without leaders, without teachers, and without supports, if you just tried to do one of those things in an environment that looked and felt like the school at the beginning of this film, you're not going to get there. It's all 3 and it's whole school.
Yeah, please.
So a lot of people are very hungry for the scientific side of this study, which is very, very important. It lets us know how the brain works and everything, but I can say I'm not scientist at this or anything, but I have experienced it firsthand, is that even the littlest things matter. Appreciating that a kid is sitting there in his desk, appreciating that he or she has walked into school, a pat on the back, as you've seen in the film, and we do hug and stuff like that. And a lot of teachers are uncomfortable with that because in traditional school setting, you don't normally see teachers hugging kids. It just, sometimes it causes an uproar. But even just appreciating that a student is there is such a huge deal. And just one thing I've noticed, here in New York is that everybody's so busy with their lives. And that's so weird to me because, it's just sitting there and people watching is really fascinating, but getting kind of off track. So one thing I noticed is that even if you drop something on the sidewalk and you feel kind of like nobody's paying attention and people are always bumping into you without saying excuse me, they pick that up for you. And they, you know what I'm saying? People hold doors and they say thank you. And regardless of the people trying to sell you stuff on every single corner, and it stops eye contact, which kind of makes me a little bit sad too, but also just saying thank you and noticing people and, just having those manners is such a huge deal. And a lot of people feel like, well, what can I do in this study? How can I be a help to this? And the truth is you don't have to be just a teacher or an educator or a psychologist or a counselor. You can just be an average person and you can go home and tell your brother, sister, cousin, friend about this study, because the more and more it gets out, the more, common it's going to be. And, people are very hungry for this study and want to know more. And, coming from a child's, well, I like to think of myself as a young woman's perspective, the littlest things matter as well. I'm no scientist on this, but I do know being told, it's nice to see you today it clicked something in me that made me want to be there the next day. And, offering water, offering granola bars, and things like that. There's small things that really matter to you and make you want to show up the next day, coming from a student's perspective.
Yeah, please.
One little medical fact that might be interesting to know right now about something that Kelsey's talking about is that we hear an awful lot about cortisol and cortisol's role in stress and what happens when cortisol shoots up. But one of the things we talk about a lot at Turnaround is that sometimes that hug or that nice word or that eye contact is not just as simple as it appears to be, because there actually is another hormonal cascade in the brain called the oxytocin cascade, which is the love hormone. And in fact, that cascade and the cortisol cascade oppose each other. So in fact, when there are hugs, when there are kind words, when there is safety, when there is warmth, you are actually activating the cascade of hormones that counteracts the effects of cortisol. So what you're saying is very, very real in science terms.
Yes.
I wanted to ask Jamie a question, but were there some Twitter questions, Amber, that you wanted to? Jamie, you brought this story to the world. How did you get young people to trust you so much to do such an intimate film? I've done a lot of interviews myself as a journalist, and I can't fathom how you got so many people to trust you so deeply with their most inner stories.
You need to take the time. We were there for the whole year, off and on, and just be there. And I would say probably about 4 or 5 months in, the feeling like we were sort of, treading water as opposed to making progress started to creep in on things. And it seemed completely natural to me. Who's this guy that just walked into school with a film crew? I wouldn't want to talk to him, right? So, and I just decided that really it would work better as a collaborative effort and work with the kids. And so we decided to give them their own cameras. And I met with each one of them and explained what I was hoping they would do. And they were free to tell their own story and share what they wanted to or not, and come in on the process with me. What do I really know of their story? Really, right? And I feel like just giving them the chance to speak and tell their own story and express themselves in their own way, it seemed to change the dynamic. But I think in the end, you just have to take the time. It's why these movies, they're hard. They're hard to make.
I have From Twitter, there's a question from some asking, will you be releasing the film for sale to wider audiences?
It is released
All right.
to large audiences. It screened in 70 communities tonight, and it did that through something called tug.com. And you can go on and order your community screening right now if you want to go and look at tug.com. We have a wonderful lead partner called Prevent Child Abuse America that helped create a discussion guide for us, and that's available too, so that, you know, if someone is like, well, I want to show this movie, but I've never held a community screening, I'm not sure how it runs. They're there in they have a chapter in every 50 states, and they're there to help facilitate screenings. We have over 800 requests for screenings right now that we're facilitating, that will run for the next 6 to 9 months with a broadcast next August on Pivot Television, which is part of the participant media empire, an empire that, you know, really tries to go after social impact as part of their content.
Okay, and also, is there a plan to further document the great trauma work being done in other schools? Well, you actually talk about resilience too, because that's, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so when I was trying to figure out what movie to make, the first thing that occurred to me was that the Adverse Childhood Experiences study could also be called Bad News, right? Because that's what it is. And that didn't seem to really make much of a movie because it was more about what could you do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Paper Tigers represents best practices for teens who've been exposed, who are, you know, you're hoping to get through the educational system and with their social and economic, social and emotional core intact so that they can go about their lives, right? Kids that have been exposed. But if you look at the whole spectrum from birth to adulthood, there's things you should do about toxic stress all along the way. And there's many things you can do. But to tell that all in one movie was too much. So we have a second movie coming out next year. It's called Resilience. And it looks at sort of the biology of stress, what it is, and the science of hope. Why we can actually do something about this. Why it doesn't stop at the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. That's just the beginning. And Resilience is there to explore that.
Yeah, I think we're just about done with time, but I'd like to ask Kelsey to add the final word. Just what are you looking forward to? What are the things that you see for yourself in the coming years?
So at the community college, I'm hoping to get my AA and then transfer. People ask me why you want to transfer if you don't know where you want to transfer to or what you want to do. I'm really undecided when I take placement tests. It's always somewhere in social work, nurse, counseling, those kinds of things, helping people, which is really a great passion of mine. But I'm still undecided. It's still right there in that area, but I'm going to keep looking forward to that. And I do know I want to transfer, just to get that, you know, that experience and kind of go off on my own for a little bit. And I don't want to be too far from home because I'll get family sick. And as much as I'm independent, I am kind of not. So it's a huge contradiction there. But it'll be really great for me to start discovering new things and see new places. And I've already loved, you know, being in New York. So it's been an awesome experience. I don't know where life will take me, but, you know, I have a lot of people by my side as well. So I know that I'm not alone in that. And that's a really good feeling.
Well, thank you. Well, please, big round of applause for the panel and for the film.
Q&A, is there time for, if anybody has any
we have time
pressing
for Q&A,
questions?
good.
Yeah, we have 2 microphones set up at either end of the
The
hall.
microphones are, yep. Yeah, just say your name and your question, please.
Hello, my name's Andrew, and my question is suffering equal to learning? Does it lead to learning, or is it completely opposite from learning?
Is suffering equal to learning? Is it the opposite of learning, or
Does it lead to learning?
does it lead to learning?
I think it's one of those multiple choice questions. We need a fourth option, which is or all of the above.
There,
I think that one way to answer the question is that there is a system in the brain called the limbic system that consists of 3 structures. And 2 of those structures, the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, are directly involved with learning. But the 3rd structure, the amygdala, is all about remembering emotions and remembering stress. So I think that the real truthful anatomical answer to your question is that these 3 structures are actually cross-wired in the brain, and that all meaningful learning requires our emotions, and that these structures are interconnected and they can work to a good end when stress is low and connection is high, and they can work against learning when stress is high and people feel isolated.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for this work, and thank you for your activity. I need to preface this by just giving a message to Kelsey. You know, my name is Barnabas Spring, and yeah, I'm an ace too, you know, and when I was 10 years old, I was sent to Father Flanagan's Boys Town with a police record under my belt, and I had some ace experiences while I was at Father Flanagan's Boys Town, and I went to Cornell on a full scholarship, and I became a teacher in New York City, and then a principal in New York City, and I worked in schools on Rikers Island and in progressive schools, and now I'm helping to implement mindfulness initiatives around that meditation in South Brooklyn for 188 schools. And Kelsey, I just want to say that you definitely have a role to play in New York City if you want to be in New York City, and I'm telling that to you as an ace brother. I'm not telling that to you as an expert, although I am now. And my question to the panel is, and particularly to my friend who's joined the New York City Department of Education, is there any conversation going around the incredible cognitive dissonance that's going to be involved in going past the talk about structures and systems and support from leaders and really starting to get into the values and the beliefs and the thoughts that people are actually thinking when they think about what it means to take care of children in America? I mean, I'm not saying this to be cynical, but my experience has been a battle. I've had to be a warrior for this. I have not gone skipping into schools where people have come skipping to me saying, let's all love the children and learn what you've learned about that one person who loved you as if he were your own son while you were at Boys Town, even growing up among adult perpetrators. And so my deep question...
Let me pause you there, and because we have a bunch of other people with questions. That's a good question.
Okay. I think that one of the things that Jamie referred to was the word movement, and this will require a movement to pressure a bureaucracy that doesn't really want to change and doesn't change easily. But the thing that does change these kinds of structures is a movement that stands for a set of values backed by science. And so I think there is a shot today. There is a convergence, whether you're in it for school, whether you're in it because of over-incarceration, whether you're in it because of the science and the public health issues. There are 1,000 reasons to be in it. And I don't think we've ever seen an opportunity like that to change belief. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you for your honesty.
The other thing I would say is that I don't think the education sector should be carrying this flag alone. You know, it's an approach that's cross-sector. And what I know is that there are some really, really smart people really trying to develop a cross-sector approach so that it's a community that has this shared vocabulary about what this all means. Because you can't just have teachers using a vocabulary, and then you've got the criminal justice system unfamiliar with with the terminology or even, the definition. It's got to move in the community. But I've seen just in the 3 years since I've started to look into this, that is emergent, that you're now seeing examples in each sector of communities that are embracing this, whether it's just clinically as in pediatrics or mental health or justice, education. It's got to be everybody.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you, well said.
If I could just add one comment. I've reported on one of the turnaround schools in New York, and the thing that the teachers kept on saying to me was, I feel like I'm a better teacher. I'm a happier teacher. My class is a better class. There are certain things that I realized that I used to do that I now think, how could I ever have done those things before, knowing now what the students were bringing into the classroom? People don't evolve backwards. And when you show people that they can have much more efficacy and also pleasure in their job, they're not going to let go of that, and they're going to tell other people. So it will spread, but I think you're right. It takes a big push.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ciara, and first I just want to say that most people in New York are not total assholes. Like, if you just talk to them, usually they're pretty friendly. But my question is for Kelsey, and I just want to know what kind of student-led programs they offer at Lincoln, or just like what kind of stuff is mostly student-led, other than the teachers.
So most of Lincoln's funding, we don't have a lot of funding. Most of the books that we have are from recycling that's left over from the other high school. So truthfully, we can't even really take books home, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people in the community who want to come and help. So every year we do like floats and parades, and we have a ton of artists at Lincoln. So, they contribute to the parade in each of their own ways, because you have the pretty floral, things that people make for the parades, and then you have the dark masks and all those things. But it's so accepting of that, and I think that's one of the hugest things is art. So contributing to the community when you have a little float in our tiny downtown, and we win every single year. Well, there's some cool ones, so I give us credit for winning. But art is a really big thing, and a lot of kids play like magic games, so card games, some video games after school, and I think the after school program is a really big deal, because for certain kids who either don't want to go home or don't have a home, like to stay after, because they can have fun with other kids and they get fed. So it's a huge thing for an after school program, and you can actually start your own club, which is really cool too. So they work around it, and I mean, the other high school in town is, sometimes helpful. You have your teachers who really appreciate Lincoln and have heard about Sporleder, and then you have some that just still believe it's exactly the same way it was, which is, it's really crazy, because everybody around the country is seeing what Lincoln's doing, but there are still some people in our own community who don't even really know, what's happening. So it's a two-way thing. It's really hard sometimes to create school clubs, but we make do with what we can. And I mean, if you've seen, it's not a big, gorgeous building. You could see the pipes running through the halls and things, but it's what makes Lincoln Lincoln. And it's, no matter how, crappy it kind of looks, that brick building is pretty much home. So it's just an awesome feeling.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Lauren Lack, and thank you to everyone, all of you guys. Just, I guess, two kind of questions. One, I have two backgrounds as an educator and also as a yoga and meditation teacher, trained in India, blah, blah, blah. And I wonder, the gentleman up there talked about mindfulness training, and I wondered if either at your school or through this whole movement, you've been using yoga, meditation, mindfulness, which obviously has scientific background behind it. That's the first question, and I'll say the second because I'll forget it. The second was, as a teacher, and I've never had the guts, honestly, to go into the public school system, but I've had, except for CUNY, but are there best, you mentioned in the film and after, are you talking about best practices for teachers who, even in the private schools, in all the schools, who really want to change the way they are with students and don't know how to be, and God knows, possibly because it's from stuff that is wrangling around in their heart that hasn't been let out?
best practices from teachers. Eric Gordon would say, well, you drink heavily. And, that's...
I mean, did they go to training, or are they just like that?
No, I'm sorry, I'm making light of something, but only because, it's a problem. And,
Yeah.
And he, they are... They have each other. I think one of the unique things about that community is that there's an incredible esprit de corps among them. And they support each other immensely in school, outside of school. It's a family. And particularly the ones that are really going after the trauma-informed approach to the kids. They need each other. And as you saw with Jeannie, there are no easy answers. And I think, programs that lessen the stress, mindfulness, anything that does that are terrific. And in fact, one movie comes to mind, it's called Room to Breathe. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it looks at just how impactful mindfulness in the classroom can be for students and teachers alike. So it's out there. And, that's got David Lynch behind it.
Okay.
And, there's no doubt that that's a good thing. But I think sometimes I think the fear that going there and investing in these kids will lead to, too much of a cost, too much giving to be sustainable. That's an understandable fear, but just watching the teachers in their lives and their children and their relationships, they seem to be doing okay. Not that it isn't hard. It's just I don't think the fear should lead you away from giving it a try, doing your best, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be everything. It's hard work. And teachers in general, to choose to be a teacher is an extraordinary thing. For me, one of the big things for me is just a renewed appreciation for educators. They've gotten such a beating in the last decade. Every single problem, you mentioned the word education in this country, and it's a problem, And there are some really wonderful teachers out there. I'm here today, I can think on one hand a number of teachers that have had a huge impact on me. And I think most people can say that about their own childhood, and they're remarkable people. They take on extraordinary tasks. They don't get paid nearly as much as they should. If this movie can, at least subconsciously celebrate what it is to be a good teacher, then I'd be happy about that.
I want to mention, too, that if you actually ever hear Sporleder talk in his PowerPoints, they're super powerful. And before he ever hired anybody at Lincoln, he always had asked, told people, this is going to be a rough environment at first. Now, we've settled, we have the same teachers for a long time. We have some volunteers that come in, but nothing like getting a bunch of new teachers all the time. But everybody kind of comes in, and you just grow into the natural setting. Like, there's people who come in from straight out of college who, just they have to, what is it called? They have to just sit down on classes before they can even get hired. But people adjust to that setting so quickly, whether it's a year or a couple of months. And they have regular meetings, which I didn't even know they had about me until I watched this film. But they do have regular meetings where they go in and they do talk about us because they care. And it's not just, okay, well, this kid's getting in trouble, we got to talk about this. They're talking about everybody. And they have people touring the school constantly from other cities, and that's student-led. I forgot. Hey, that was one of the questions. Yeah, that's student-led. So we actually take people around the school. But I also wanted to mention something, too, really fast, is that when you have an attachment to a child, you're not only affecting that child's life, you're affecting their kids and their kids, because you've shown them, what really happens when you grow that attachment to a child and you show them this is how life is supposed to be. This is how you should feel. It affects generations on, and it's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about kids. So.
You rock, Kelsey.
I want to just add on to your question. There seem to be these two poles between sort of judgment and curiosity, where people they judge the kid for this. We saw that video of the police officer, with the girl in the chair, that horrible video. how do you bring people, in your work, how do we bring people more and more people to moving away from these reflexive judgment, which is reinforced from the system, to a genuine sense of curiosity, like maybe this young man is coming into the school with more than I am appreciating. And I know, speaking to some of the teachers in the turnaround school, they were taking kids out to lunch, they were doing various things like that to try to understand what's really their home life, so they have a better sense of that. And I'd love if you could speak to that too.
I want to build on what Kelsey said, because Kelsey put her finger on it. One has to have an intergenerational perspective. And when you meet a troubled individual, child, high school student, homeless person in the street, rather than rush to judgment, think about where do they come from? What was their childhood like? Who looked after them? Was there an attachment figure available to them? Maybe not. And the story extends to the generation before as well. So being curious about a person's history is a central part of moving away from that, I think you were saying, rush to judgment, not reflective judgment, because I think from that curiosity you can then build reflections into your own mind, reflect conversations with others, and come up with possible explanation that might be shared with the other person. And relationships are based on those kinds of connections.
One thing that I think is also very, very persuasive to teachers, the idea that we have brains that are malleable into adulthood, and that you as a teacher can be a brain builder. You can look at the things that you do in the classroom as literally having an effect, positive or negative, but positive, if you have the skills and the tools to be able to do it. Most teachers don't think of themselves that way, and they get relatively few, if any, developmental training in their pre-service work, which is a huge issue. The fact that you can be a teacher and not know that every single day you have an opportunity to build and develop a child's brain. So I think this is part of the movement building that will ultimately, I hope, become an enormous culture change in teaching around skill building that recognizes the developing brain.
Movement is a key word, sorry. Movement is a key word in that, definitely. So I just totally went blank, and this always happens to me. Okay, I'm sorry. Forget what I was saying. I had something really good, but I forgot.
Hi. I'm in the city for something completely else, and I came to this movie because I had an evening free, and I'm blown away. Thank you for the movie. I'm from Western Massachusetts, and this movie affects me personally. I'm going to try to be concise, but a month ago, I had to report a situation to DCF. That's for a child that I love so dearly. And she's 9, and I've known her since she was 3. And her mother was addicted to crack and then to heroin. And I tried to work with the parents. I've done crazy stuff in this situation. I concocted an intervention because I know if you're dealing with DCF, if you report it and you're not a blood relative, which I am not, you don't ever get to hear what happened. You just report it and you pray that they end up safe. And what I wish could have happened was, because I know about the parents, I know the history of abuse for them as well, I wished that there could have been a circle and a dialogue, like what you did in the school, which was amazing. How do we bring that conversation to DCF? Because it's killer. I mean, it took me years to do this, and I felt ill inside because I wasn't reporting the situation. But at the same time, people were saying it could be worse for her if she goes into foster care. And it was a horrible question that I lived with every day for 6 years. So how do we bring this information to DCF? How to recruit? I mean, there's a program in our area in Western Massachusetts called Restorative Justice, where they actually have a Native American talking stick circle where you get a victim and a perpetrator together in a Native American talking stick circle, and they do a consensus around what would be appropriate restoration. I would love to see that kind of process happen with DCF.
So
Just Department of Children and Families in Massachusetts.
So what can ordinary people do if they witness something like this in the community? What's the smart response, and how do you bring it to ACS in New York City?
Well, you must refer to ACS with a sense of trust and follow up. And I think that the awareness of ACEs that this film advances is an awareness that is spreading from many different sources as well. And the Administration for Children's Services in New York City is keenly aware of the problem of ACEs. I'm involved with an intervention called Group Attachment-Based Intervention, which is one of a number of interventions aiming to intervene in the first 3 years of life so that a circumstance like you described doesn't linger on and remain unresolved. Our group attachment-based intervention is a family preservation project that would welcome a mother like the one you were describing and try and help her retain custody of the child. Getting off the drugs is vital, of course. But I think we're moving on almost at 10 o'clock. So maybe we can take one more question.
And I just want to acknowledge how hard the decision that must have been for you.
Hi, I'm Darcy, and I just completed my master's in drama therapy, and I want to touch on a question that I think was started, but I want to push it a little further. I'm really curious about sustainability in these schools, and I'm thinking especially of the teachers in place, and whether what was in place in Lincoln or in New York public schools as far as supervision for them, as well as like the guidance counselors or social workers that might be placed in a school like this. But what's the goal or what might be available for them in supervision so they can continue this important work and they don't burn out? Kind of we saw, I think it was Jeannie crying in the car talking about how hard it is to hold all the things. And I would imagine that that would be a problem that many teachers experienced. So what might be available or what the ideal is for them as far as supervision?
I think the best practice is that teachers, but also student support staff like social workers and guidance counselors are part of a professional learning community with and for each other. I think that here's the rub. The rub is that in high-risk school environments, that those systems have been largely destroyed, and to a significant degree by the amount of stress in those schools. So, I mean, certainly our practices in our organization involve a restoration of that professional learning community for both the support staff, and the teaching staff. It really isn't possible to work in these kinds of environments. It's a little bit like, when they say in airplanes, that you should put the oxygen on yourself first and then take care of your child. It's a little bit like that in these schools, that they really do have to have oxygen. And the oxygen is the collaboration amongst themselves in the context of a support community. But you have to build it. These are the systems that have been tremendously broken from stress.
Yeah, it's not often. This idea of policy, it's such a weak, unappealing word to me. I've got pretty cynical about, when people turn to policy, when they say policy, then I think, oh, well, we're at the dead end point because they don't know what else to say. But in this case, the idea that this knowledge it lies completely outside teacher credentialing right now in this country just seems outrageous to me. And and I don't think you can just sort of ask the federal government to step in and demand it. But I think what Pam mentioned earlier, is that if it's seen, and it is, and it should be, as additive to teachers to learn about trauma, not yet another burden that's being piled into their classroom, because classrooms are often the receptacle for many, many issues. People want to get in classrooms to affect change. But, you know, a section on being trauma-informed for anybody getting into teaching be a really basic, simple way to make a big difference, so that when people get into these environments, they know about it. There's awareness, they know what to watch out for, they know what the triggers are, they know what they need to explore within themselves, and it's all sitting right there. We're not waiting for any more research about whether or not this would be helpful. We just need to do it.
Right, it's about the support to help them continue that learning and the backup. Yeah. Thank you so much.
So I know you guys